I'm Ashley, and I've been at Stratos for about 5 years.
You didn't lose on the team score, stay on there. Just your TV.
It was just the TV. I'll blame the TV. So yeah, I've been at Stratos for about 5 years. I'm an M365 consultant, mainly working in the Power Platform, but do a lot of SharePoint as well. And then this is Divya.
Hi all, I'm Divya. I've been at Stratos for a couple of years as an M365 consultant, mostly specializing on Power Platform.
So during our session, we want to look at why you would use solutions in the Power Platform, especially when integrating with SharePoint. We'll talk about the pros and the cons of using solutions with SharePoint, and then we'll actually jump into a demo. So the first bit's a little bit of me just blabbling on about why we use them, the pros and cons, and things like that, but then we'll actually jump into a demo and show you how we set it up. This normally takes us about 4 or 5 hours to do totally, so we've condensed it down a bit. So hopefully everything makes sense. So in the demo, we'll go through creating a solution, connecting it to a SharePoint site, building an approval workflow, and then releasing it to production. And then we'll also talk about how to manage flow fails effectively, not just using the other box one. And then we'll have time for a Q&A. So what we've got in the demo is basically stock standard. It can be used, tweaked and amended for different processes as well. But this is what we've added in here is basically a really good base that we can use for most clients. Not much we would take out, I don't think, starting from scratch. So often what we hear from clients is what is a solution? They see it, they don't use it, but a solution is a package of that groups components like apps and flows and components, connections, and which effectively creates a really nice process for management and deploying apps between different environments. So why use solutions? They are a really, really good foundation in Power Platform, and they are essential for proper application lifecycle management. Without them, it's actually really hard to create dev, test, if you have test, and a prod environment. I've got here that they're good for efficiency and reuse. So you can build the workflow kind of once and then reuse it throughout Power Automate. I've got a hot tip here. So what we actually do is create a template solution with our clients. So after we've spoken to our clients and figured out what we'll be building, we create a template solution, which holds basically the patterns that we will use throughout the rest of the flows. From there, it's basically a copy and paste into the process that we're building at the time that we're building it. So that works really well. The solutions are good for scalability, and what that means is as you grow, the solution can grow with you. So developers can add tasks or update flows or apps. So mostly what I'm talking about here is flows, but it's pretty much the same with apps. But you can make changes without disrupting production, so without disrupting live process. Really nice. And then I think Sarah mentioned it before, everything in one place. So it creates a really, really centralized management. Everything's in one place, really easy to find. Another good moment. Then there's some things that we've picked up on that we like to advertise. So using SharePoint as a database with Sandbox or production or your different environments is free. Doesn't cost any additional licensing as long as you don't have any premium connectors. So we've been able to implement the Sandbox in production, and it just uses your standard. So everything that we're showing today is included in the standard P3E5 licensing. The next thing is, so there's a lot of updates coming to solution flows and not other flows. So this first one here is versioning. So if you've been in the new UI, you would have noticed it. You get the version history, which Divya is going to show in the demo. You get save as draft. And what I love is you can save flow as a draft when it has an error. Couldn't do that before. You had to fix all your errors before you save them. But now you can save it with errors. And then there's obviously publish once you're ready to test your process. And then we've got environment variables, so you can make it specific to your SharePoint dev site or your SharePoint prod site, and Divya will show that more in detail as we go. Another reason is child flows are free using solutions, as long as you don't have a premium connector, but you can trigger a process as a child flow only in a solution flow. And then solution flows are included in the automation dashboard in the Power Platform Admin Center. So it gives you a really nice out of the box view of your flows and apps, but like I said, mainly focusing on flows. So what are the pros of using solutions with SharePoint? The integration, so it's really seamless between SharePoint document libraries, as we're talking about, and Power Platform. Gives you flexibility. So as I said, you can create a base template and then adapt it for the requirements of what we're using today. You could adapt it to a slightly different process. Versioning, so kind of what I mentioned before, you can manage different versions. So when you update dev, you're not updating prod straight away. You have to kind of manage that whole process. And then environment variables. So they make the workflows adaptable across different environments. That's been a kind of lifesaver for us without having to go into a prod flow so we used to create a dev and a prod, and then we'd have to update them manually between the different flows. But now that we've got environment variables, you update it in one place. Emails, group IDs, things like that, really easy to manage with environment variables. But there are some cons. They are complex to set up, especially if you're new. It's hard to know where to start, and it can be tricky. The maintenance, so there's changes in one part of the solution could impact another solution, like environment variables. They're for the whole environment. So if you've got them in one solution and you add them to another solution, you've just got to be aware of those kind of things. So it just gets a little bit tricky, which is kind of the dependency management there. So solutions often rely on various connectors. So staying organized is key. We often create a list where we hold our environment variable names and then what we've got just so that we can see it really easily in one place, which is also similar to the default solution. When to use them with SharePoint. There's lots of different reasons as to why you would use solutions with SharePoint, such as repetitive processes or wanting to streamline processes. But as a small Power Platform team, this is kind of what we use. Just bearing in mind that we are limited to the constraints of the client as well. So sometimes we actually only get the default environment available to us, which is why that's on the other side. But when we would use a solution would be medium to large projects, when it has high business or user impact. So if you wanted to make changes, you want to make sure that it's in a dev process. For a complex project, we'd use solutions when it involves multiple components, when it's essential for daily processes, integration with other systems, and then if the project is subject to change. The other one that I've got down the bottom is multiple developers involved. So what's really nice about solutions is if we both have the right licensing, I can set up a solution, start it, and then Divya can jump into the solution and see everything that I've done without me having to go and share the flow with her, as long as she's the right thing. When we wouldn't use a solution, so just simple customization, we might be testing something, or we might just want to see what's happened in the document or something like that. When there's low impact to business user, so it might be a process that a client needs as a one-off or something like that. So we might not go to the extent of creating a full-on solution. When it's for learning or training, when there's limited budget, that's not the case, but sometimes it is. When the default environment is only available, you could still use it, but when the default environment's only available, we'd probably still have a dev and a prod. That would go back to manually making the changes between the two. And then, as I said, small and temporary automations. So why we have the design we have, this is pretty much our bread and butter. We do this all the time, content. So we've learned a lot from creating these for clients. And so the design that we have here is a really good template. Naming conventions, so Divya will show this in the demo that she's going to do, but we always leave the action name, so like get items, and then we say what the action is doing. This helps, like in a year's time, you're going back into a flow, or someone else built the flow, and you wanted to see what that thing did. If you get rid of that get items, all it gives you is kind of the SharePoint icon, and then you can see what's in the inputs, but you actually don't know which action it is. So we always leave the action name. Use a get action after the trigger. We've had some cases where we needed to change the trigger of the flow. And if once you change the trigger and you don't have a get item that you're using the dynamic fields from, everything disappears from your flow and you don't actually know what's disappeared. So it's really good to have a get items, and then from then on, always use the get items in your actions after it. Error handling. So we always add error handling for our flows, whether it's a simple email. We have quite a big list set up as well. But we always add error handling because the Microsoft one's not always timely. So if it's like a health and safety incident and the flows failed, no one's going to be notified straight away. So we always add something for error handling. And then it goes to the right person as well, not just the owner. So the Microsoft ones go to the owner. They go to a specific. We always like to keep the 30-day flow duration limit in mind. So that might mean splitting out flows into 3 or 4 different flows, because it does have that 30-day. Where that impacts this one is probably the approval part of it. So if someone doesn't approve the flow in 29 days, then the flow will time out and fail. So we always add something after the approval to say if it times out, we email the owner of the document and say the approval timed out, you're going to need to submit again. And then just probably our preference, not a must do, but we like to keep our flows quite streamlined and kind of in one lane, if you call it, but flat and nested conditions. So if you had like a condition and then another condition and another condition, it gets quite tricky to manage where you are. So we like to use variables and if statements, a lot of if statements, to keep it quite flat and streamlined. Any questions? So I'm going to jump into the demo. So Sarah showed this morning, but I've also pre-recorded because I hate demo calls. So to create a solution, we're going to go to make.powerapps.com. Start with the Power Platform by heart. And then the first thing I'm going to do is check the environment that I'm in. So most of the time you want to create it in your dev environment first. So I'm going to go to the top right hand corner and check that I'm in my dev environment. And then go to solutions on the left hand application. So from here you can go to new solution and then enter the name. So we'll create an internal name for you on this part here. So I'm going to call this mastering document approvals. And I'm going to create a new publisher. So a publisher is basically an author. What that means is it tags the objects you're creating within a solution, and then it kind of minimizes duplication of things as well. So I've created a new one here called document masters. I'm going to create the internal name yourself when you're creating publisher, for you. And then we always use like a 3-digit prefix. So I've used DX. Once you select next, and go back to the new solution, select the publisher I've just created, and that's it. So your solution's created. So now what I'm going to go do is create a document library. So you might already actually have it created, but I've created it in this demo because I want to show the columns we're going to create for this process. So in my SharePoint site, I'm going to create my document library. So I'll create it from blank. And this time I've called it control documents. Obviously, I'm using camel case here. That's just to create a really URL, so it doesn't have %20 in it. You can choose your sensitivity labels and show it in navigation if you want to. Support documents for content approval. There's one thing that you always need to turn on with the SharePoint document library, and that's content approval. So if you go to the settings cog, library settings, and then versioning settings, there is one called require content approval for submitted items. If you want to flip that to yes, what that does is it kind of creates the out of the box SharePoint pending approval. projected draft status on documents. So I'll turn that on, and I've just turned on my major and minor versioning. So you can say who sees draft items. So at the moment, we've just left it in the default, which is those that can approve documents can also see the draft versions. Out of the box, so from that, you'll see the content says approval column, click into the document library. So that'll be out of the box. And then I'm just adding the ID column, because I always like to see the ID when I'm building flows and doing different things. So I do that at the start. And then I want to add the version number of the document. The only way you can do that is to go to the old style of editing a view and select versioning. Then I'm going to create 4 columns, I think it is, which we use in the flows. So I'm going to have started, which is date and time. You can add time if you want to. I'll also add finished. So what we'll do there is say when the approval was sent, we'll update the started column. When it's finished or approved, we'll update the finished column so you can see clearly in the document library. So no one needs to know flow. They can see it in here when it was started, creating assigned to it at the moment. So it also show who it's gone to. And then the last one I'll create in here is the approval history. So there's a really nice action that comes out of an approval flow, which is called response summary, which basically has everything that's happened in the approval. So I'm also posting that back to the library, which is really good for those using the document library to be able to see without having to know flow. And then I'm just adding my spaces because if you're anything like me, I never go back and do it. So I've got to do it now when I create it. And then the last column I'm going to add here is send for approval. So what we're actually creating with our flow is a triggered flow. I prefer the triggered one over when an item is created, which you can trigger it again. So I've created a column called send for approval, and it's just a text column. And then Divya is going to show what we do with that. And then I just updated the name in here. So now what I want to do is connect that SharePoint list to my solution. So create an environment variable, basically. So from my document library, I'm going to go back to Power Platform or Power Apps, and it's still got my solution open. Then I'll go new, and it's called environment variable. So this is what I can use in my flow actions. So when it says, what's your site, I'll use the environment variable here. Naming is really important because when you have lots of solutions, you see all of the names of your environment variables. So I always start it with whether it's a site or a list, the name of the library, and then I put connection at the end because you might want to use a text value as well for the name different times. So I did also select data source because we're going to connect to a data source, and then I'm just adding a description. Okay, so the data source is here, and then we select SharePoint. So obviously you can do Dataverse as well, or you can do SharePoint here, and select a connection, and then I'm going to select site. You'll see here that it didn't actually pop up in my sites because I just created the site. So you can also just copy and paste the URL into the current value.
So do they be created in the solution or in the environment?
Well, you create them in the solution, but then they become available in the. So what you've got down here as well, which is quite new, is the export value. So at the moment, I've set it as the document library. If I tick yes to that, when I export it to production, it can hold that value. So you can leave it the same, but I've ticked no because ideally we'd change the size. And then I'll create one for my list as well. So it's always important to do the site first because you can't do the list without the site. So I do the same thing, name it with the list, and then the name of the list, and then a connection. And then I sped up this one because it took ages before. So just adding a description of what it is. And then obviously it's still a data source, SharePoint. And then we want a list. Then you'll see under the site that my site that I've created here is popping up at the top there. So I'll select that as my site, and then my current list will be the controlled document. So it will automatically go on. And that's it. So that's all I'm doing. I'm going to pass over to Divya to explain the rest of the flow, moving it to production and flow failures.
I'm going to show to integrate flow solution, how we can trigger that, how we can deploy across multiple environments, and how we can use the other business units would like to have the same kind of idea. So for that, I can go into the solution. So I'm just click on the click on the solution, and as you can see, it gives me all the environment variables that's been created already. To add the flows, I'm just going to click on cloud flows. There are no flows in the solution. So there are two ways we can add the flows into a solution. If you already have an existing flow created in the environment, you can just click on add existing, and that will give you a pop-up where you can set the flow in the environment and you can add it to the solution. So if you are looking to move all the flows in the environment, you can just move to the solution seamlessly. But in this case, I don't have a flow created already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on new. And I'm going to click on automation. And I'm going to click on cloud flow. And here I can choose the type of flow. So we are going to trigger the flow from the library for a selected file. So it's going to be an instant flow. So I'm just selecting the type of trigger as instant. It gives me a pop-up. I can give the flow name, so which I'm going to give as document approval flow. This is a mandatory, this is an optional step. You can just skip it and you can do it. I'm just doing it now. And I'm going to select the trigger as for selected file. Just click on create. So that would open the flow. The trigger and the name. Now we have the flow set up. So let's configure the environment variable. Okay. So all you have to do is just click on the trigger. That will open the options like to select the site address and the library name. And usually what we do is we would get the drop down and we would select the sites from here. But in this case, what we are going to ask, we have the site in the environment variable.
I got a favour to ask. Would you mind facing the front when you're talking? Sorry.
Yeah.
I can see you.
Yeah. So in here we can given the environment variables. For that, all we have to do is just click on the drop down and enter custom value. And if we click on the dynamic content, that would open a panel with all the details. From where we can select the site name. So this is why it's very important to name the environment variables with the prefix with site or list of what the data connection is. That makes it so much easier for us to search for it from the tab, and also we can avoid making any mistakes using the wrong variables. And as Ashley said, this panel gives all the environment variables that are available in the environment. So we just have to make sure that we select the right one from here. So I'm going to select the site master documents approval site address here. And if I look on the library name and if I click on the drop down, that would give me the document libraries that are available in the site. So I can just select it from here, but what we are going to do is we are going to create a solution that goes across multiple libraries or the sites, and we need to create an adaptable solution. So I'm just going to add the environment variable which we created for the library. So which would be again enter custom value, dynamic content, and we can search for list control documents. And then it is always good practice to have a get action item after the trigger. Like I said, it is because if you change the trigger in future from an automated to instant or instant to a scheduled one, it removes all the outputs that's been added in rest of the flows. So it is always good practice to have a get action item and then use the output from the get action item in throughout the flow. rather than using the trigger one. So I'm going to add a get file properties from here. And in here, I'm going to follow the same steps to add the environment variables, the site and the library name. And then I'm going to pass the ID from the trigger. So in future, if we remove the trigger, then it just removes this ID from the get file properties. So which will be easily fixable if we change the trigger of the flow. So another good tip is always try to rename the actions as you build, because if you use any of the outputs in an expression in the flows, and if you rename it after you build the entire flow, it will break those expressions. So it is always good recommendation to change the names of the action as you do, and good practice is to have the action name and just do a hyphen or a colon and give a small comment what it does. So which I'm doing. The question time. So how many of you still use the old designer in Power Automate? Even I was the same a couple of months ago, but I'm going to show you a few features which will make you to instantly change to a new designer and solution flows. So one is saving the flows as a draft, which means you can save the flows with the errors, and you can have it as a draft copy in your system until you publish it to the users. So that's a very cool thing. And yeah, and publishing that. So publishing it makes available to all the users. And the next cool feature in the new design now of solution flow is too. So let's check out. And next cool thing is version history. The versions, so if you click on the versions, it gives you the past versions with all the timestamps. If you click on any of the previous versions, you could see the edit pane in the flow changes according to the actions that was in the previous version. If you want to restore to the previous version, and in case if something goes wrong, or if you'd like to have the old versions, you can just click on the restore button, which is on the top right. That will just restore and publish the flow. That's available only through the solution flows and only in the new designer. It has some bugs, but yeah, it's a good thing to have. So now we have the action and the trigger set up. So next it's time to add approval actions to the flow. So I've added a few more actions, and we have added a few more customizations to the flow. In the trigger, I've added a text input where the users can put in the approver's name when they trigger the flow. So I have the text input. I've initialized a few variables in here to process the output, and have also added a get file metadata to get the metadata of the file. So the next step is to add an approval actions. So with Power Automate, there are few approval actions, but I personally prefer create an approval action, because we can do several actions before the approval of the approval, like updating the SharePoint with the startup time, approval name, etc. We can update back in the data space what's happening with the approval action, so the users know the information about the approval. So, and under the approval type, we have few options available. In this demo, I'm just going to stick with a simple approach, which is approve or reject first to respond. I'm going to just make a simple one, approval saying yes or no, but we have few other options like sequential approval, responses, and you can have multiple approvals. Sequential approval is a new one that we pick up. So now I'm just going to customize the action, just having a good title for the approval action and passing few dynamic variables from the file. So as I said, I added a text input in the trigger. So I'm just going to add the assigned to from the dynamic content, which we get from the trigger. Just going to make sure that it gets the email. it gets an encoded value, which makes the flow to fail sometimes. We had a few issues with the guys, so I'm just making sure it's just the email. And then in the details tab, we can obviously add more metadata or more information on how we can approve it. And yeah, we can add more details as well. After we add the approval, as we have added the approval action, I'm just gonna finish off the flow by adding more actions to it. So one is updating the file properties after creating the approval. So here I update the started time, when it's been started, and who's the approver back in SharePoint, and updating the status value as well so that the users know the flow has been started, and setting the content approval status, which is using the out-of-the-box SharePoint features, making the document to be pending. So I'm doing all those actions, and this wait for an approval action waits for the approver to approve the request. And then I'm appending few variables which gets the approval comments, approval outcome. And again, I'm updating back in SharePoint about the outcome after the outcome, whether it's been rejected or approved, important details. But it's just updating back in the SharePoint with all the details. And I have a flattened condition which check if it's been approved or rejected, and then I compose the emails in here for the approved and rejected, and I'm sending an email to the person who triggered the flow, notifying them about the approval outcome. This is the flow file action. I also have added the flow file action. Just reply in a line, sorry. It's not letting me to apply that particular point. So I have the flow failure actions as well configured here. In case the flow fails or gets timed out after 29 days, it would send an email to the person who initiated the flow saying that it has been timed out or it has been failed because the approver had the document open while updating file properties. So it just notifies the users about the flow failures. Cool. So now it's testing the approval workflow. So as Ashley already created the library for me, so I've just applied I have applied JSON formatting to the library, and I've created a nice dashboard kind of view in here, so that the user can interact with the workflows and interact with the UI as well very easily. So as you can see that I've created two buttons, one is start approval and edit properties, and the start approval button will be available only for the draft documents. And for the approved documents or pending documents, they won't be able to start the approval. And there's another button called edit properties, where the users can change the property metadata columns by changing the document name or type or any data. I'm going to just trigger the workflow for this document, which is policy change announcement document. And in here, as I said, I added a text input to the trigger. So this is the text input where I can add the approval details in the flow. So as I've started the flow, I'm just going to refresh the browser to see what the flow, so whether the flow has updated the approval name and the started time and everything. So as you can see, the flow has updated the approval name as E. Carter and the approval status has been set to pending. So and assume that have now done the approval account. So I'm just gonna approve the request from the Power Automate screen, but there are a few other ways you can approve it from Teams, Outlook, etc. So I'm just gonna approve it and have it in comments to it. If I go into the flow history, you can see what the flow has done. It has created the approval, it has updated the SharePoint, and it is waiting for the approval task. And then it appends a bunch of variables. And it posts back all the information back to SharePoint, and it sends an email to the user about the outcome. If I go into SharePoint, you can see the approval status has been appended to approved, and it has posted the log back in here. Who was the approver and what was the response, and when was the request date, and what is the response date, and everything. Cool. So the next one is handling the flow fails. So we always add a flow fail attachments to literally all the flows, just so that we can create a business process which is very reliable, and we can keep informed users with what's going with the approval process or with the flows. So in now, what it's a very small demo. So what consider the approver had the file open. Obviously, the actions in the flow won't be able to update the file properties because the file has been locked for use. So I said that so the flow sends an email to the initiator. Divya, saying that the flow has been failed for this document, and it gives more. You can add more details like the time or the date it has been failed, and you can add a link to the run history as well. So if the user clicks on the run history, they should be able to see the error in short, like that the file was locked by the user. There are a few ways we can get around it, like to check if the file is locked. We can send an email to the person who locked the file, and we can ask them to close it, and then the flow will proceed. But in this case, I don't have those actions in here. And we can send these flow fail emails to the IT support team or anyone who's working with the flows or the business units, so that they could develop more things to the flow that we can fix it. Cool. So before we deploy the solution into a different environment, or if we do use the same template for a business unit, there are a few things we should consider before the deployment. One is removing the default values from the environment variables. So as Ashley showed, there was a toggle button when you create an environment variable, which is export value. It's always turned off by default, but we can turn it on if we think that after deployment it's going to use the same value. So always make sure it's turned off or turned on depending on the use case scenarios, and confirm the run on the users in the flow. So as you all know, with the instant flow, we need to set up the permissions for the flow for the users. So make sure that you select the right users or you select the right library who can trigger the workflows. Use environment variables for views. So I think many would have run with the 12 lookup column views recently with the flows and the power apps. So always the best practice is to use the views in the flows that we can limit the number of columns. When Microsoft says 12 lookup columns, it includes person columns, metadata columns, multiple choice columns. So it is always very hard to have a list less than 12 columns. So we always use views in the Power Automate to limit the number of columns when it gets subtract properties or updates properties. So those views has to be an environment variable in case we are going to deploy across multiple environments, because the flow would get only the view ID, not the view name. So it is good to get environment variables for the views. And check data connections in the source solutions and the destination solutions to see if it has valid data connections, and checking the user permissions and security role, which took through us. So ensure that users who use the flows or the apps, they have the good permission setup and the security role setup. And using the flow IDs from the Power Automate for JSON buttons. So the button which I showed for start approval, it uses the ID of the flow. Always make sure we use that ID from the Power Automate screen rather than from the Power App screen, because after every deployment, the Power Apps identifier changes, but the Power Automate always have the same ID. So if we use the Power Apps ID, then it wouldn't work if you make another deployment correction. So it is always good to have the IDs from the Power Automate. So now it's the exciting part, how we can deploy this solution to across multiple environments or across a different business unit in a different site or in a library. So we can deploy the solutions in several ways, like using pipelines, Power Platform CLI, which is command line interface, or manually exporting and importing. Today I'm going to show you a simple one, which is manually exporting and importing, because using the Power Pipelines, it requires lots of work setting up the environments, and it's an automated process. So I don't have the process in my demo environment, so I'm just I'm showing you the manual export and import. So all we have to do is we have to just click on the solution and we can just click on export solution. That opens a panel in here, and just make sure that we publish all the customizations before exporting the package, because we need the up-to-date package, not the old one. So I'm just going to click on publish, and I'm going to wait for the changes to be published. Once it's published with a green tick mark, I just click on next. And there are two ways we can export the solution. One is managed, another one is unmanaged. We recommend using managed if you are going to use the ALM process, which is going from dev environment to test environment and then the prod environment, because we don't want to make any changes or customization in test and production environments. So it is always good to have as a managed solution when we are going to follow the ALM process. But for the other one, unmanaged, if you're going to reuse the same solution package for a different business unit maybe, and in case if we need a customization to be made, in that case, I would recommend using the unmanaged solution. In this case, I'm just going to stick with the unmanaged solution, and I'm going to export it. As you can see, there's a gray banner saying that it's exporting the flow, exporting the solution. So once it is done, it turns into green, where I can download the zip file. Cool. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the production environment where I'm going to deploy that. So I'm just going to click on production environment. And in here, I have just clicked on import solution, and where I can browse the downloaded file. And then if I click on next, if it's a first time, it would check if I have the valid connections. And this is the part where we set up the environment variables. So in this scenario, what I've done is I've created a new library called policies and procedures, and I'm going to use the same approval workflow on the policy and procedure as well. So as we configured all the environment variables in the actions in the flow, if we need to change, consider you have a control documents library and you're going to change the flow to a different library, all you have to do is change this environment variable, and that pretty much updates all your flow actions. So it is good to always develop everything in a solution with environment variables. So in here, I'm going to select the SharePoint site and the list. And this is where it matters using the export value. If you have that toggle on, then it would automatically populate the value. It wouldn't allow you to change the site or change the libraries. So just always make sure that before deployment, you have it turned off or turned on according to the scenario. Once I select the data sources, it will import the solution. So always the first import would take 5 to 10 minutes because it has to set up all the components and the objects in the background. But once it is done, you get a green mark. I'm just going to go into the solution, just check. It has imported all the connections, environment variables, and the flow. Yes, it looks like it has turned. And if I click on cloud flows, we can see the cloud flow in here. And the status is also turned on. So in case if the flow import fails, or in case of the flow, the columns which we use in the flow, like the expressions or the trigger condition doesn't match with the libraries, in that case the status would turn off. So it is always good to make sure that the flow is turned on, and just check the last modified data as well. So this is the other new library which I created, and where we have deployed the solution in. So as you can see here, I have a new document called the policy, and I have copy pasted pretty much all the JSON formatting. And the way I created this library is just from existing library. But if you follow the ALM process, what you can do is you can create the content types at the tenant level, and you can inherit those content types across dev, test, and production. So in case if you want to add more columns or more changes, you can do it at the tenant level, and you can push all the changes to all the libraries. So you need not have to do manual work like changing the column type or column name or anything. So you do not have to do it manually. So you can control it all over in the global level. So that's the other way of doing it. And I'm just going to start the approval. This is the first time I'm triggering the flow. It's just sign in. And in here, I'm going to give the approval name. Then I'm going to start the approval. If I refresh the screen, you should be able to see that it has updated status and the approval name. Once the approval approves it, post back all the details that in SharePoint. Yeah, it's posted back all in SharePoint. So, post down. Good. Yeah, so this is how we can redeploy across multiple environments and we can reuse the same template. So as Ashley said, we can create a pattern kind of thing for the organizations which can be used across multiple business areas. And if we have an approval flow like this that has to be used wide across multiple teams, then we can do the process. Questions?
A question from online from Samuel. If MS turns off a flow that does not run for 90 days automatically, is there a setting to customize the time frame, i.e. 6 months if needed? You can answer that one.
I actually don't know.
No.
I don't think there is.
No, you got there's some workarounds online. You can like flow the week before it, or the day before it turns off, will send you an email saying it's going to turn stuff off, and you can watch that message. But then Microsoft changes the string of the alert, so you can't read it as well. That's the only way you can figure it out at the moment. Sorry, Samuel. Just get in front of your customers and say, just use your flows every day.
Obviously, we haven't had that issue, so there you go.
Not the flow which drops the fake document and triggers the flow.
Yeah.
Every 2 days, just make something fake.
Or one that turns off or turns on or turns off flows.
Yeah, we have some flows which run. We have some flows which only run once quarterly. They are importing data. They're picking up data from like file from SharePoint. So it's not a big scenario where it's required actually.
Rich, there are our automate admin actions.
Yeah, so we said it, Samuel. So investigate the Power Automate admin actions in Power Automate. You should be able to do what the guys just said: turn on, turn off flows. But you should have a blanket. You can find the flow. Might need.
Should be easier than that.
Yeah, buy a premium license. Yeah.
We're going to chat about Michael on, so he can talk, and then we've got the. So thanks for that.